Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to do a bit of exhortation in regards to not having a woman. You know, we live in a society where not having a woman is basically seen as, or rather, I should say, having a woman, is seen as a badge of honor. Sleeping with a bunch of women is seen as a badge of honor. And this lesson is to promote a vibe that, when you don't have one, it can be a very good spiritual benefit to you. And that's something I kind of wanted to kind of touch on because, for primarily two things, a lot of, our men, within this society, they strongly attach their self-worth to having that woman, right? And then one of the things that it causes them, because they look for comfort, but the comfort's in the wrong areas, right? So, and another thing I also want to touch on is that, you know, when you first learn your understanding of knowing your knowing who you are, your identity, your history, your culture, you know that, okay, having a woman, or having, I should say, multiple women is something a man can do. But is it expedient for you, within your journey, within your walk, within this time, right? And that's something I kind of wanted to touch on today, because sometimes as young men, we want to basically multiply, and acquire all these different women, because knowing that we can, right? But knowing that also, it can be an obstacle. It can make things a lot harder for you, right? So, I kind of just wanted to flow within this topic of, not having a woman can be a very good, strong spiritual benefit to you, for younger brothers, like myself, who can relate, for brothers who are single, right? It's a good benefit to you, and I sincerely pray, and hopefully this lesson may be edifying, right? Nothing too long or anything like that. So this is the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, verse 16, and it says, "Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Why shouldest thou destroy thyself?" Right? So, you know, one of the things is, one of the things when you first learn this understanding, you have essentially a strong zeal, you know, we understanding that, okay, yes, we can have multiple women, but, knowing you can do that doesn't mean that you should do that. It may not be very expedient. It may not be very right in that situation for you to do, because it might actually pose as, I don't want to say a threat, but it can pose as certain, like an obstacle, for you, in terms of proper spiritual development. Certain things like having that access all the time, and having them around you all the time, it may not be very beneficial for your development, right? And that's something, I'm guilty of, growing up, within this understanding, still being within, my infancy, stages. It shows that when you don't have them, it's actually a very good, helpful, benefit to you. Why? Because you don't have a lot of distractions, right? Remember, we're surrounded within a culture that constantly pushes pleasure, like always around you. It's a culture that promotes essentially, basically, a lack of discipline. It's a culture that promotes gluttony. It's a culture that promotes um just do whatever you want, without actually any sort of restraints or any sort of bridling, right? So this is part of the condition of the battle in the kind of society that we live in, right? People just live essentially in a mind frame of constant excess, right? And that's something that also you see a lot of our people do within the entertainment industry, right? So, you know, yes, and this again, doesn't neglect the importance of brothers that might have a good woman, and this doesn't also neglect what the Lord how the Lord created Eve to be essentially a helpmeet unto Adam, because those the Lord created everything in twos to quote that scripture in Sirach, the 33rd chapter. So them being an asset to you, them being essentially an asset is a benefit, but understanding the flip side as well, it can allow you to be and get more closer to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, and allow you to actually even address certain things that are within your own vessel, where you're like, oh man, I could, without this distraction I look at it, don't look at it as a burden, but look at it as an opportunity to address certain things that might be, bothersome, for example, to your spirit. I'll use this as an example. I'll use myself as an example, right? For me, I used to, watch a lot of those adult content, and that adult content is very, very, it's very, very profane. It's very, very dimming. It basically dims your vibration, and it pushes a lot of your energy into it, rather than actually dealing with them, face to face, right? And understanding also the reasoning of why you're watching some of these things. I'm just using adult content as an example. It doesn't have to be, because brothers have their own things that they might have to work on, whether it might be you have a craving for certain foods, maybe you have a craving, for alcohol, maybe you have, I don't know, like, every brother, has like their own, thing that they deal with, right? But the point really is not having them around. It kind of forces you to essentially look more inward, all right, and get more closer to the Lord, because Yahweh Shai even said a man's life doesn't consist in the things that he possesseth, right? And and a woman is also a possession, right? So we don't our self-worth shouldn't be attached to them, right? They're basically like accessories to you, right? So let me go to something the Apostle Paul said. This is First Corinthians chapter 7, verse, I'll start at verse 6, and it says, "But I speak this by permission, and not of commandment. For I would that all men were even as I myself, but every man hath his proper gift of the Most High, and one after this manner, and another after that," right? So I'll read verse 8 actually, and it says, it says, "I say, therefore, as to the unmarried and the widows, it is good for them, even they abide as even as I," right? So there is a certain spirit that the Lord had on the Apostle Paul, because it shows that he was very, very productive, right? So not dealing with them. So there is a benefit in terms of when you go through periods of not dealing with them, there is a strong benefit, because it can show that you can be a lot more productive as an individual spiritually, utilizing his different gifts, right? And that's something he also goes into in the 12th chapter, talking about the diversities of gifts, because he was essentially an individual who was very, very profitable. So this is another aspect of showing there's a spiritual benefit, towards, you not having a woman, right? This is not a type of lesson where it downplays the importance of having like a silent woman if our brothers have that. This is not the type of lesson that downplays the importance of having a woman in the household, right? But we know in these times you're not gonna get the best quality, because a lot of our women are contaminated with different philosophies of the serpent. Going back to Genesis, the third chapter, right? They're contaminated with these philosophies, and understanding the condition of the battle too, right? So this is a lesson to actually kind of boost brothers in terms of exhortation and understanding that, you know, if you don't have one, it doesn't make you less of a man, right? So I'll read verse 8 again. And it says, I say unto the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them, they if they abide as even as I, right? So, there is benefits when you're strongly, more tapped in to the spiritual stuff, and then being able to drive that, into actually utilizing, particular gifts, right? It could be exhortation, it could be, whatever brothers are good at, in terms of actually being more profitable, towards the benefit of the church, the benefits of the body, the benefits of the ministry, right? So this is one of the benefits and understanding of when you don't have one. You can be in, it can make you a lot more profitable, right? And this is something, this culture that we live in doesn't promote that sentiment of balance, or it doesn't promote, actually developing spiritual things, developing yourself, right? And really and truly, we're developing a relationship with Yahweh Bashem, Yahweh Shai, and understanding that, man, this is what's not pleasing. Let me work on this. Let me address that. So in terms of that alone time too, when you don't have one, you're kind of more forced to essentially look more at yourself, and you're forced to do a lot more self-examination. That's another thing too, because there could be certain things within your childhood, maybe certain issues addressed, or I shouldn't say addressed, certain issues that might have occurred within, whether it might be parents or siblings or whatnot, that affected you, and you feel the need to actually address a lot of these things because it affects the way you think, it affects the way you operate. This is a cleansing process. It says in Psalms, how should a young man cleanse his way, to roughly paraphrase, by the cleaving unto thy word, right? And Yahushua comes in the volume of the book, right? So we're cleaning off a lot of the old habits, right, that are essentially were displeasing to the Lord, right? And essentially becoming, I think it says that in Corinthians also, one second, a new creature. Let me see if I can find that. Is it 5? Wait a second. Or is it 2 Corinthians? One second. Maybe 2 Corinthians. Oh, here it is. All praises. Okay, let's see. This is 2 Corinthians 5 and 17, and it says, therefore, if any man be in a Mashiach, he is a new creature. The old things are passed away, and behold, all new things are become new. So, we're new creatures in Yahweh Shai HaMashiach, right? And these things, we look to add more, like it says in Peter's, add more faith, diligence, um, brotherly kindness, temperance, so on these fours, and exhibiting these certain fruits of the spirit that actually have a more sweet smelling sacrifice, right? I think that's also in Ephesians. Let me see if I can find that actually. Having a proper sacrifice, because we understand that we are the sacrifice. As opposed to the Levitical priesthood, we were actually using, animals and actually sacrificing the animals, right? So this is Ephesians 5 and 2, and it says, verse 1, it says, be ye therefore followers of a Mashiach, of the Most High Yahweh Bashem Shai, as dear children, and walk in love. And love is keeping of the commandments, as Mashiach Yahushai also hath loved us, and hath given himself us for an offering and a sacrifice to the Most High, for a sweet smelling savor. And it says, verse 3, but fornication and all uncleanness and covetousness, and let it not be named among you as becometh saints, right? So it's really about becoming more reformed, right? And that's why I was discussing before about addressing certain things that we had issues with. And covetousness is, it's funny it mentions covetousness too, because you don't want to look at other brothers' situations as well. Just they have a woman, and then you feel like you want that also. It's still, look at your situation in terms of not having a woman as a benefit to actually becoming more profitable, becoming more becoming more whole, within Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai. And this is one of the things that I've noticed, right? Just speaking from experience, you know, once you have that closer, relationship with the Lord, I should say, right? When you're having that closer relationship without going some time without them, you don't feel like you need them. Yes, we're in this flesh. Yes, sometimes we feel like we're burning. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, right? But at the same time, spiritually, you feel more satiated, where you don't feel like you need them, like you don't need their presence, you don't need their validation, you don't need their phone number, you don't need, you know, them to actually make your day, so to speak. For example, because a lot of our people, especially men in the world, they attach a lot of their self-worth, to getting having a woman's Instagram and video, or having her phone number or her Snapchat and stuff like that. So when they don't have that, they feel like less of a person. They feel like they failed, because spiritually they're empty, right? Spiritually they don't have anything of substance to offer, right? So look at that situation. If you don't have a woman, it's very, very important, to have that alone time with the Lord, through reading, going through our history stories, right? Prayers, right? So you feel more satiated in the spirit, right? So I guess I'll read this in Timothy. Let me see if I can find this. I thought this was very, very, very good. Um, this is 1 Timothy 4, verse 12, and it says, let no man despise thy youth, But be thou an example to the believers in word and conversation, in charity, in spirit, and in faith, and in purity. Right? It says, verse 13, till I come, give attendance to reading, right? Scriptures say, blessed is he that readeth, right? To exhortation, to doctrine, right? And neglect not the gift that is in thee, which is given to thee by prophecy, right? With the laying of the hands of the presbytery. So that's basically, that goes into elders, right? When you see that word presbytery, I forgot what the Greek word it says there, but and it says verse 15, and it says, meditate upon these things and give thyself wholly to them, that thy profiting may appear to all, right? So there is it that word profit is a very, very reoccurring theme, and understanding also that, because it mentions here profit. Understand also, when you go into some of the accounts of our forefathers, they were very profitable in situations not having a woman. And like, so for example, I'll use Joseph, our forefather Joseph, as an example, because remember, he went through his time of suffering, and after he was falsely accused by the Pharaoh's wife, it said somewhere in that chapter, I believe it's 39, Genesis 39, it said that the Lord was with him. And what was very, but the point I really want to make in terms of being more profitable is the fact that, you know, um, when he was being sought after, because when the Pharaoh had his dream, he didn't have anybody to actually give a proper explanation and a proper interpretation, and that's where Joseph came in. So he was able to actually not only provide a proper interpretation, he was also able to provide as an action plan in regards to what to do, during those 7 years of abundance and those 7 years of famine, right? When you go into his story, right? So Joseph was very, very profitable to, the heathens, right? To the Egyptians, to the Pharaoh and his house, because he worked as an overseer, right? Yahushua was very profitable, to the disciples and the people who he was performing certain miracles, because how is it you're saying the Son of Man doesn't have a place to lay his head, but yet for all you're being sought after for a woman that's trying to grab onto your clothing? So when you put two and two together, Yahushua was a man of value. So look at it as an opportunity to, increase, become more profitable. Look at it as an opportunity to actually, you know, um, get closer to the Lord. Yes, it's an element of suffering. You have moments, you're you're burning, right? You might just have to, seek a professional, right? If that makes sense. But the point is, don't look at it as a burden, but look at it also as an opportunity, because sometimes, we get caught up in our situations, and knowing that, a lot of these situations is really for, your benefit, right? So um I just thought I would just, discuss this, just to kind of lift up brothers, spirit, for young brothers, don't have, if you don't have a woman, your self-worth isn't attached to, these women, right? So um, I guess I'll leave the lesson there, but Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. I'd just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, Bashim Makakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the others of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth. Until next time, I say Shalom.